Hey guys, what's going on? Andy Baker here of andybaker.com and owner of Kingwood Strength and Conditioning. And today I want to do a video on something that I've been wanting to do a video on for quite some time, about a year. Today is May 14th, 2019, and that is 1 year to the date of my bicep reattachment surgery that I had last year. So it's been about a little over a year since I ruptured the right distal bicep tendon. And so what I wanted to do was, this is not going to be a video that's really going to appeal to everybody. Most of you guys, if you haven't experienced this injury, you're not dealing with it right now, then this may not be the most useful video for you. But what I wanted to do was make a video for guys out there that are going through the same injury and can't find a lot of good information on it, because that was I was kind of in that boat last year when I hurt myself. Was, of course, like everybody else, first thing I did was get on Google and that sort of thing and try to find as much information as I could about the injury, about the surgery, about the rehab process, see what everybody else had done. I knew the injury was fairly common, and there just wasn't that much great information online. A lot of medical people had kind of put out their views on it, but it was not really in line with training lifters or rehabbing lifters, that sort of thing. A lot of it was just kind of about the surgery itself. There just wasn't a lot of great information on it. So I was fortunate enough that I had some good people that I could get in contact with that had some experience with it. Mainly my good friend and my longtime client, Dr. John Patrizzo. Up in New York. He's a physical therapist, but also a strength coach and a lifter himself, and a very good resource for dealing with injury. And so he's somebody that I've used all throughout my career for myself, and also when I have situations with clients or that sort of thing, I always try to refer them out to him. And he was a really good resource for me, as I didn't use any physical therapy here locally in Kingwood or Houston. I relied strictly on John's advice, and I did the rehab myself with his guidance, and it appears that everything has turned out okay. So this video is hopefully going to help some of you guys that have gone through or that are going through this, or that will in the future, and hopefully you'll find this video and it'll be a good resource for you. So what I want to do is backtrack a little bit to a little over a year ago, May 7th, 2018, of how the injury actually occurred, why it occurred. Okay, so some of you guys know that have followed me for a while. The injury happened on a set of speed deadlifts, or what we call dynamic effort deadlifts, or some people would call CAT deadlifts, compensatory acceleration training. So basically, it was not a set of heavy deadlifts that got me. It was a set of moderate weight deadlifts being pulled fast. Okay, so this is a technique that I've used for a lot of years with myself in order to accumulate deadlift volume. I've never been a good responder to doing a lot of sets and reps with deadlifts, other than if I use a fairly light weight and pull the reps with speed. That's always been my preferred approach to accumulating deadlift volume. So never had an issue with it, never pulled a hamstring, never tweaked a back, certainly never ruptured a bicep tendon, that sort of thing. But on this particular day, one rep got away from me. The weight was at 405, which was not an exceedingly heavy weight for me. It's still 405. So, it's still 405 pounds. No matter how much you pull, 405 is a lot of weight to put on the, on the human body. But it was a weight that I've handled, on a deadlift for, many, many years, probably hundreds of reps done with 405, and never been injured before. So it was definitely a surprise to me. But basically what happened was, when you're pulling something for speed, whether it's a dynamic effort deadlift, or if you guys do power cleans and that sort of thing, that it's very easy to introduce a little bit of arm pull into the movement. You're trying for maximum speed, you're trying for maximum acceleration, and what often happens with that sort of thing is that even if you know better and you know not to do it, it can be difficult to pull the weight without introducing a small amount of arm pull, which creates just a little bit of elbow flexion. That's what happened to me. My guess is that there was probably not more than a few degrees worth of elbow flexion in that pull, but it was just enough that when I locked it out very hard at the top, this was actually one of my last sets, I think it was my last, like the last rep of my last set. And so usually by that time, I'm actually pulling probably with the fastest speed and the best acceleration towards the end of the workout. And so I moved the weight super fast. I remember the rep right before it had come off the ground really, really, really fast. This one came off even faster. I locked it out really hard, probably had just, maybe 5-10 degrees of flexion in the bicep, right at the elbow joint, and it just snapped the elbow straight. Again, probably just a little bit there, but that was enough. Kind of felt like I got shot for a minute. I knew it was more than a strain, just by the way that it felt. Looked down, obviously dropped the bar. Could feel where obviously where the pain was coming from. Looked down, the distal head of the bicep right here, the lower head right above the elbow was basically flat. About 3 or 4 finger widths was just totally flat. It was like somebody just let the air out of it. I have pretty big biceps, so it's fairly easy to see, that it had really flattened out. And then a good portion of the muscle had moved from the lower head up here. It kind of rolled up the arm a little bit, so there was a bigger ball of muscle up here at the top. So it was very, very easy. I knew I was kind of crossing my fingers that maybe it was only partial, but I knew better in my head. I knew that it was a complete rupture of the bicep. So I went to a lot of guys, if you don't know, I'm a vet, so I have coverage at the Veterans Affairs. We actually have a pretty big VA hospital here in Houston. So went down there right away, had to get into the system, and they got me into the system, did some evaluations and that sort of thing, and then met with the surgeon a couple days later, and the surgery was performed about 1 week after the injury. So one thing that's very important, if you guys do suffer this injury, it's one of those things where you need to get it fixed within a week to 10 days. So everybody that I talked to, whether it was Dr. Patrizzo or the surgeon at the VA, everybody was in agreement these things need to happen fairly quick. It gets more complicated, and the results are not quite as good the longer you wait. So unfortunately, I talked to a couple of guys since I did my original videos last year. I've been contacted probably several dozen times by people that have had a bicep tear, which is why I wanted to make this video, because I know that it happens, and I know a lot of you guys that are in Latin America or Europe, somewhere you have to wait long periods of time in order to get in and get a surgery like this. So you need to try to get it done as fast as possible if you can. So within a week to 10 days. Mine was a week right on the dot. And so surgery went well. All the research that I had done on there are more than one ways to do the reattachment. It seemed like everybody that I had researched that was in either the athletic world or the lifting world. Brian Shaw had ruptured his bicep tendon back in 2014. A local guy here that I'm friends with, another former pro strongman, Ryan Bracewell, had ruptured his bicep tendon a few years ago. So I had talked to them I had researched about the procedures that they used. It was pretty common that everybody pretty much goes with what's called the endo button technique, okay, which is what I requested from my surgeon. He said that was fine. Apparently that's pretty much the standard. Wasn't always that way, but it's a single incision procedure. You can see right there the incisions down here on the forearm. It's a single incision. They basically go down, they pull the tendon down, they drill through the bone, they pull the tendon through, and then they attach this little metal piece or plastic, actually I'm not sure what it is, metal or plastic on the tail end of it, and they kind of flip it around so that it can't come back through the bone. That's called an endo button technique. I think that's pretty much about the strongest reattachment that they can do right now. So if you're a lifter, if you're an athlete, request the endo button technique. They also use a little screw there to get the proper tension on it after they set it. So they screw the tendon down into the bone afterwards to give it even more strength, and also just to get the right amount of tension on the reattachment. So after that, basically they set me up for a 1 week follow-up to come back, and that was basically more to look at the incision than anything. But right after you have the surgery, you're pretty much going to either be in a brace or a sling, and they're going to want to keep your elbow around 90 degrees for about 6 weeks. And that's the real important part, where that tendon is trying to heal. You really, there's some rehab that they can do, some physical therapy type stuff, but most of it tends to be for the wrist and the shoulder and that sort of thing. At that point, you really can't do any stretching or strengthening of the actual bicep and the tendon. It really, what they prefer, was according to Dr. Patrizzo, as well as the PTs at the VA and the surgeon, you really just leave it alone for about 6 weeks and let it sit there, let it heal. So that was probably the hardest part for me, was being in that sling for such a long time. Yet obviously it didn't just affect my lifting, it affected my work. I wasn't able to be as active online, writing articles and that sort of thing, or interacting with clients online, and lots of typing and that sort of thing. It was everything just got more difficult. I wasn't as useful around the house or with my kids and all that sort of thing. So it goes beyond lifting when you're kind of down to one arm like that, and you have to be careful with it to just kind of let it rest and not let that thing accidentally get forcefully extended. So they did allow me to take it out of the sling a few times a day and just kind of let it, just kind of passively stretch. So basically what I was limited to was I would take it out of the sling and just kind of let the arm hang. I could do that when I was in the shower, or just a few times a day. If you start to get to where your elbow being in that bent position for long periods of time will almost feel like it's getting ready to explode. And so the tendency is you really want to just stretch that thing out and straighten it out, but they really advise you not to actively straighten the thing out and just kind of, at the most, just let the thing hang, let it stretch. They want you to move your shoulder around a lot, move your wrist around a lot, so those joints don't get all locked up and everything too. But the elbow definitely gets really, 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 really stiff as that tendon is healing. So that's something that you'll have to deal with. So first 6 weeks, again, there was really no rehab. There was no physical therapy during that time. It was just range of motion type stuff for the shoulder mainly. And if you want to continue training during those 6 weeks, there is some limited stuff you can do. Hindsight, I didn't do anything during the 6 weeks. I was completely out of the gym. I focused mainly on work and just stuff around the house, and I really completely took off from lifting. Hindsight being 2020, that was probably a mistake. I got a little bit more deconditioned than I probably should have let myself get during that time. The older I've gotten now, closer to 40 than 30, I found that long periods of time of not training are much, much harder to bounce back from. When I was in my 20s, I could take a week off, 2 weeks off, no problem. And it seemed like I would regain that ground really, really quickly and without issue. But now, the older you get, the harder and harder it is to kind of have those quick and easy comebacks after long periods of time off. So I probably would have, looking back, but also too, a lot of it's mindset, psychologically, emotionally, that sort of thing. You're really, really, really not into it. But if I had to do over again, I would have trained more. He said, well, what can you do with one arm? Not a whole lot, but I would have probably done a lot more work on the leg press, some of the leg machines, that sort of thing. I wouldn't have done anything to put myself in any kind of danger where you would fall and have to catch yourself or anything like that. You don't necessarily want to force the issue. You're just really trying to prevent atrophy and really, really severe detraining. So, doing something like leg presses or whatever would be something that you could do during that time to keep your lower body going. There's obviously ways if you want to squat. I've seen guys that were doing one arm squats with the safety squat bar and that sort of thing. You can kind of, if you want to really, really stay with your training, you can do that sort of thing. Or if you just want to take it easy, things like the leg press, or even just riding stationary bikes, doing cardio, that sort of thing can be helpful. So so I would have done that. Dr. Patrizzo sent me some literature, some very interesting literature about unilateral training having effect on other sides of the body. In the upper body, obviously can't do much when you only got one arm, but things like single arm dumbbell shoulder presses, single arm bench presses, single arm rows, curls, tricep work, basically anything that you can do with one arm, unilaterally of just one side of the body. There is some evidence in the literature that actually has an effect, not just on the healthy side that you're working, but also on the other side as well. And that there is some effect, there is some response from the body from doing that work, even on the side that you're not actually able to use. I didn't do any of it, so I probably should have. It would have been good just for this side of the body to have some work. And maybe I would have had a little less atrophy on the right side, but I didn't do anything for 6 weeks. So, but that literature is out there if you want to look into it, and look at maybe some of the potential benefits of unilateral training, even on the other side, the injured side of the body. So, So that was the first 6 weeks. That was really frustrating. It seemed like it went on forever. Everything is difficult when your arm's in a sling or a brace a lot of the time. So the brace for me was difficult to fit on. They couldn't get one that fit me well, and so we wound up just going with a sling. But a lot of times they put you in a brace, and it'll start off like week 1. You'll be right at 90 or more, and then they can set the dial on there to like every week they give you like an additional 10 degrees range of motion. To be honest, I don't know if there's anything really to that. I would just kind of adjust my sling as I needed to let my elbow extend out a little bit more to relieve some of the pressure. But from what I was told with my surgeon, they want the thing to heal short, so it gives it a little bit more strength. So they want you to keep it here for a good portion of the time. Now, I went back to the physical therapy clinic at the VA at the 6-week mark. That was the surgeon wants to evaluate you at 6 weeks. It was actually a little closer to 7 weeks just because of the scheduling of the day I could get down there versus what the surgeon had. They like to do the reevaluation at the 6-week mark. Mine was about 7 weeks just because of scheduling. So at this time I had actually not trained for 8 weeks because it took me a week between the injury and to get the surgery. So I was chomping at the bit at this point to go in and get my get the all clear from the doc at the 7-week mark to say, yeah, go ahead and start lifting again. And he came in, felt around on it a little bit, said, it's good, it's healing up, everything looks great. The surgeons they're hard to trap for long periods of time to get a lot of dialogue with them. So they're in and out. They send you down to the PT office, talk to the physical therapist down there, and their protocol that is directed from the surgeon. They basically told me I could not do any lifting at all for 6 months. And I knew that this was way too conservative. I wasn't sure exactly when I could return to actual lifting. But everything I had read online was that, most guys were back in action way before 6 months. And so I knew that I didn't have the right answer, but I knew that the recommendation they were giving me at the physical therapy clinic was way too conservative for a lifter. So, but I wasn't sure where to go. And of course you don't want to re-injure the thing. You don't want to just, I'm not a surgeon or a physical therapist, and this was my first time with this injury. So, I didn't want to baby it forever and just get further detrained and further atrophied. But at the same time, I didn't want to re-injure it. So I remember on the way home from the hospital, I was on the horn with Dr. Patrizzo, and, he basically told me, and this matched up with a lot of the anecdotal stuff that I had read online from other lifters, was that basically I was okay at this point at the 6-week mark to start doing some light, very, very light lifting, and which would basically be a sub for the physical therapy. He didn't think that I needed to actually go through the physical therapy rehab, which was basically the therapist kind of actively stretching out and doing range of motion exercises with the bicep, and then doing the stuff that they would do there, the very light strengthening stuff, very light dumbbells, very light resistance bands, that sort of thing. And he felt like that was unnecessary for me, that having access to my own gym and that sort of thing, that as long as I was intelligent and not overly aggressive, that I could manage the rehab myself. And I agreed, so that's what we did. And I didn't go back to any more physical therapy after that first evaluation. So I did the rehab on my own. So at the 6-week mark, basically we came up with a very, very simple protocol for me to follow. So for the upper body training, basically it was bench presses, barbell bench presses, and then I would do like a secondary pressing movement, like an incline barbell press or a standing overhead press. And then I would do pull downs. I'll talk a little bit about how I did that in a minute, but light cable pull downs, light cable rows, so like seated cable rows, and then tricep press downs on the cable. So those were kind of from the 6 to 12 week mark, that was basically my routine that I would do like 2 or 3 days a week. Okay, so when I had left off training, I was probably doing, I'd have to go back and look, but I know I was working in the 350 to 375 range on my heavy bench sets. So, and I went from that to day one, when I first got under the bench press bar for my first upper body workout. I was really barely able to do the barbell. It was very, very weird. I knew I had lost a lot of muscle mass. I knew I had atrophied quite a bit, but I was surprised at how weak that I was. And so the recommendations that I had got from John was to start very, very light on the pressing movements, and just go, everything is slow, and we're just trying to kind of rebuild some muscle mass, and work the range of motion a little bit. I could not lock out this elbow all the way at the beginning, so I could lock out my left arm, and then this would have maybe 20 degrees or so that I couldn't lock out. His advice to me was, do not force it, go as much as you can, but after the first kind of push into extending it further, go ahead and stop there and just let the range of motion come on its own, and after a few workouts it'll be there, and not to force anything. He was very, very adamant that on pressing movements you're careful that you're not snapping anything straight, so nothing fast where you would forcefully extend the elbow quickly under load. So everything was easy, going up into as much extension as I could, without having anything, without any kind of fast or violent lockout, and the elbow just wouldn't straighten out. As far as the pain in the bicep and the forearm, there was almost none. All of the issues I had on day one with the movements that I was doing was all the peripheral muscle mass. It was weird, like even with the very light bench pressing, the musculature in the pecs, the shoulders, everything, I can remember feeling my pecs feeling like they were almost going to rip off the bone. It was very, very odd feeling at that kind of weight. But started off on day one, I think I did the bar on the bench. I did the bar on the incline press. I could not do an overhead press. I did not have the range of motion back in my shoulder to do an overhead press. It was my affected side was very, very, very unstable at the beginning. So even a bar, it was very wobbly trying to go up. So I stayed with an incline press. And then on the real rehab for the bicep occurred on the next couple of movements, which were the cable movements. That was his advice to me, was stay with movements that can provide continuous tension. Nothing heavy, so we were doing 3 sets at 25 reps at the beginning with probably a 50 RM. Okay, so it was a very, very lightweight. I had like 10 pounds or something like that, 10, 20 pounds on the pull-down machine on day one. And this was really just really, really slow range of motion stuff, just enough weight to kind of actively stretch that muscle out. Okay, so that's all that we wanted. That's all really I could do. Nothing heavy. We stayed at 25 reps for several weeks and added weight only when I could do 3 sets at 25 fairly easy. And again, even the sets at 25 were not even close to limit. I could have probably done a set for 50 or 100 reps at that weight. But it was just, anything was better than nothing at that point. Again, the arm had been locked up like this for several months now. And so this was mainly about range of motion for the elbow. And it was, there was obviously a lot of atrophy in the arm and the forearm, that sort of thing. And even with the very, very light weights, the muscle mass started coming back almost immediately. So within a workout or two, the atrophy started to go away, and the muscle mass started to come back a little bit. Range of motion got better. The tricep press downs he recommended, again, kind of the same thing, like sets of 25 to 30, just for range of motion to help try to extend that arm out, because at this time I still couldn't get my arm extended out. So I basically did that workout for 2 or 3, for about 6 weeks, 2 or 3 times a week. I basically did that same thing and just added load when I could. The bench pressing strength came back relatively quickly. So day one, it was difficult under the bar. Day two, I was able to go up to 95 pounds, and it felt easier than the bar did. I still had the sensations of kind of muscle tearing in my chest, a lot of shoulder pain in there, but I just kind of pushed through it. Day three, I was able to go up to 135. So I was getting stronger really, really, really fast. So I didn't push anything into a level where I felt like I couldn't get the weight or that I would fail or anything like that. But the more that I trained and the more that the weight went up, the better the range of motion got, the less atrophy there was, the more balanced everything started to feel. Obviously, at the beginning, it felt like my left arm was doing all the work and my right arm was barely pushing at all. And over time, that cleared up. So did that for 6 weeks. Muscle mass started to come back. Obviously, I was still way behind where I was. I think over that time, maybe I worked up to, I don't have the exact numbers, but I want to say it was around like 205 or something like that on the bench press. I was able to work up to at that point for like 5 to 8 reps or something like that. So obviously way down from where I was, but it was I was happy with the progress. So during this whole time, I never had any issues with the bicep or where the reattachment was down here in the forearm. Again, all of the problems that I felt like I had were all around that area. So mainly my shoulders. And that was concerning a little bit because I had never had any shoulder pain before. So I've always had healthy shoulders. I've always had really, really good range of motion. If you guys have ever watched me do a press video, you can see like people are like, how do you get your shoulders to be that limber? They just always have been. I have really good range of motion in my shoulders. Never had any kind of shoulder pain. I have had a lot of shoulder pain since then, doing various things. It took me a long time to be able to overhead press. I had a lot of restricted range of motions in my shoulders, a lot of kind of grinding and stuff going in there. And all I can attribute that to is just inactivity, just a long time without doing anything. That's all I can think of. I've had some issues. I've had a couple of minor pec tears since then. These have been in the last few months. One of those is a pre-existing injury, but I've had a couple of small pec strains this past year, which was not really the norm for me. And so the only thing is it tied to having the injury or not? I don't really know. It might be from training with, one side that's more, that's doing more work than the other and kind of working unbalanced like that. I'm not sure. I can't say for sure. It may just be the fact that I'm getting a little bit older and getting a little bit more wear and tear, a little bit more miles on me. But I definitely have had more issues this year than I've ever had in the past. Okay. And the only thing that's really different is that I had a fairly significant upper body surgery. But I haven't had any issues with the bicep or the forearm. So at the 12-week mark, I called John. I said, all right, it's been 12 weeks from the surgery, 3 months. Where do we go from here? He said, basically, you should be good to go now. You're basically cleared to train. However you want to do it. You can start working up the weight, on your back exercises. You can get a little bit more aggressive with the benching, and you basically return to your full routine. Do whatever you want to do. And so I did. And so I started kind of getting back into my full routine, doing all the movements, getting a little bit more aggressive with the weight. Things just got better and better and better. And that was, so for the past 9 months, that's what I've been doing. In terms of things that I've changed from my, since the injury with my current routine over the past 9 months, one lingering issue that I had when I started back was grip strength. I still don't think my grip strength on this hand is 100%. It's harder on deadlifts than it used to be. It's harder on several things. I just find that my grip strength is not quite where it used to be. When I first started out, it was definitely grip was a major limiting factor on this right hand. And so I started doing some extra grip work, which is not something that I've ever really done in the past. I've never had issue with grip on the deadlift. It's never been a limiting factor. So I've never done any direct grip work. But this was becoming an issue on a lot of different movements. So I started doing some direct grip work. As I tend to do, I overdid it on the grip work, and I actually got some pretty severe inflammation set up here in the forearms on both sides. I was doing a lot of plate pinches, with the plate pinches. You can start with them heavy, hold two heavier plates together like that. You can also do it, like finger, thumb and forefinger, thumb and middle finger, thumb and ring finger, that sort of thing, holding smaller plates. That's a little trick that Josh Bryant showed me last year that really did help with the grip strength on both hands. But you can also, if you do your grip, you can see all these little muscles here in your forearm going crazy. So if you overdo the volume and the frequency on the grip training, you can definitely cause some problems up in your forearm. So I probably got into too much volume, too much frequency on the grip training too fast. And so I had some issues there. That was a little bit of a setback. So if you need to do some grip training, I would say, go ahead and do it. But just ease into it and don't do too much too fast. That inflammation was a bitch to get rid of. So the grip training was, that was a little bit of a setback. I would say that my overhead strength is still not where it was. I've had some issues, just kind of shoulder pain on both the left and the right side, some range of motion type stuff. So I got away from doing a lot of really heavy shoulder presses just because it was, and that's not anything I've ever had issues with in the past. It does seem to be getting better, but it's something I've had to ease into and work slowly towards of getting back into heavier shoulder training. So So that's been a little bit of an issue. Is my bicep now at 1 year post-op, is it full strength? Actually, I don't think so. I don't think that I'm quite 100% yet. Some of that's probably psychological. It's hard to commit fully to some of these movements when you've had an injury like that, because especially something like that where it was real sudden and real acute, and the injury just happened like that. It's, you talk about sport athletes will say the same thing when they've torn an Achilles tendon or something like that, trying to cut on the football field or the soccer field. It's harder for them to kind of pull the trigger and get going fast again when they've had that experience. So it may be some of that, but definitely on things like pull-ups, chin-ups, I'm not nearly as strong as I was. And that's just, I think it's getting better, but I just don't think I'm there yet. In terms of direct bicep work, I have gone back to training my biceps, although I didn't start that right away. I probably waited 6 months, 8 months before I started doing any direct bicep work. And when I started, I was real weak on the right side. And I still am quite a bit weaker on the right side than where I was, say, a year ago. So definitely not as strong on the direct bicep work, although I really don't push that kind of stuff heavy. In the past, I had done, sometimes on barbell curls, I would go heavy of, sets of 4 to 6 reps of, up to 185 pounds on barbell curls. And that's not going to be something that I'll probably ever do again. So just anything that's going to put that bicep at risk like that of being, really, really, violently straightened out under heavy load is probably off the table. It's just not necessary. So most of the guys that I've talked to that have had these injuries, quite a few of them have been from deadlifting. So again, I was using the alternating grip on the speed deadlifts, which was a stupid thing to do. I knew it was a stupid thing to do when I was doing it. And that kind of makes me even madder at myself that I made a mistake that I knew was a mistake, and yet I did it anyway. Is one of those things where it's something if I was advising a client, I would have told him to do it a different way, but a lot of times coaches we're not our best clients, so we go against our own advice. I still do the speed deadlifts now, but now when I do it, I use a double overhand grip and I use straps. So it's just there's no reason to put yourself at that kind of risk again. I have gone back to heavy deadlifts. I'm back into the low to mid 500 pounds for reps on deadlifts, and I do still use a mixed grip. But I have switched to where the other hand is now underneath. So I did that for 20 years and never got hurt at a heavy weight. So am I putting my other bicep at risk by using a mixed grip? Probably. But lots and lots of people deadlift with mixed grips that don't blow their biceps out. I really don't think it was the mixed grip that got me. I feel like it was the speed deadlift with the mixed grip. So I'm not a really good deadlifter anyways. And so the weights that I'm using, you just don't see a ton of bicep tears with guys that are deadlifting, for reps. And like the heaviest I'll get for reps is like the high fives, 575, 585, something like that is, that's about all I can do. And you just don't see a ton of bicep tears at those weights. So I'm not too worried about it. For a lot of my speed work, the volume work, I go ahead and put the straps on and just pull double overhand. If you guys are not competitors in powerlifting, a double overhand with straps is fine. Just a regular double overhand grip. You're going to be limited on how much weight you can use. So I don't really recommend that because you just can't pull that much weight. But if you can learn to hook grip, like if you don't have tiny baby hands like me and you can learn to hook grip, a hook grip is really, really good. For me now, what I do is I just pull my one main work set with an alternate grip, and then I go ahead and do everything else I'm going to do that day, double overhand grip with straps, and that's been a good strategy for me so far. So most of the guys that I talk to that have blown out their biceps were doing strongman activities. So it wasn't deadlifts that got everybody. I've talked to a bunch of guys that have doing continental cleans on an axle bar. I've talked to a couple guys doing that. Several guys that have blown them out doing the stones. The tire is a big one. So if you guys are, and some of these guys are competitive strongman athletes, and some of them are just fucking around in their gym, for doing like tire flips and stuff for conditioning and for fun. So, that's just something that you guys need to think about when you're doing all that kind of stuff, is just watch the position you're putting yourself in. A lot of times people aren't thinking about their bicep when they're going to flip a tire or pick up a stone or whatever. They're thinking about their back and getting in good position. They're not paying attention to, making sure that arm doesn't get snapped straight like that under a load. So you guys that train strongman for either competition or just recreationally, be careful with that stuff and watch yourself. Several of the guys, my buddy Ryan Bracewell, who, he's like a 900-pound something deadlifter, and used to be in competitive strongman, and he blew out his biceps, lowered his tailgate down on his truck. And so, freak things also just happen, around the house. And it's not necessarily the load, it's that violent extension of the elbow that snaps that bicep straight. So just be really, really careful with that stuff. So anyways, guys, that's pretty much it. In a nutshell, I just wanted to, make a video for you guys in the future that might have some issues with this. You can feel free to contact me. I've talked to a bunch of you guys on the phone, via email that have had this injury. I can kind of walk you through what I did, and give you some ideas. Again, I'm not a surgeon. I'm not a physical therapist. I'm not an expert in this, but I just wanted to throw my 2 cents out there so that hopefully it can help some of you guys maybe rehab a little faster, and also to know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Relatively speaking, this is a minor injury. It does, anytime you go under the knife for a surgery, it's a big deal. But at the same time, this happens to a lot of lifters. A lot of guys have had ruptured bicep tendons and come back and compete at a high level in powerlifting and strongman and sports or whatever. So it's not the end of the world. I know for me, it was the first time I was 36 years old when it happened. And for me at the time, that was really my first major injury. Certainly my first major injury that required surgery. And so I had been lifting prior to that for 20 plus years and really never gotten hurt. So it was definitely a wake up call for me. Very depressing, especially those first 6 weeks, not being able to train. I didn't like it. It felt like that process was going on forever. I felt like I was losing a lot. However, so it's very, very easy to get kind of depressed and down in the dumps and that sort of thing when something like this happens. But just try to keep it in perspective that it's very, very recoverable, and that, really in 12 weeks you can be back training like normal. In 6 weeks you're back doing some light stuff. So it's not the end of the world. It feels like it happened yesterday, and already we're at a year. And, I wouldn't say I'm back to 100%, but I'm back, pretty damn close. And so it feels like kind of a blip on the radar. So just keep your head up, keep your chin up. Don't rush things. Don't get re-injured for those first 6 weeks. Try to get a good doc to do your surgery as soon as possible. And then, follow some of this advice and contact me if you have any questions. And certainly I will refer you on if you need a good recommendation for a good medical professional, more so than a gym owner, to give you some advice on your specific situation. I definitely recommend Dr. John Patrizzo up in New York, so he can consult with you over the phone or via Skype, that sort of thing. So I would definitely recommend that you get with a physical therapist that is used to working with lifters and athletes, and that has an eye on not just keeping you healthy and safe, but also getting you back into the game as soon as possible, because a lot of these people are used to working with members of the general public, and they want to take the path of least resistance. They do want to get healed and that sort of thing, but they're very okay with not lifting anything heavy over 5 pounds for 6 months and just living on pain pills. But for a lot of us, we don't want to do that. We want to get back in the game as soon as possible. So you need to align yourself with somebody that shares that goal. So anyways, guys, I went longer than I thought I would, but there's the video. I'll put some contact information up at the bottom. I really, really hope this helps. And again, if you're injured right now, you just got injured, you're trying to find some good information, just keep your head up, keep your chin up, and get in contact with me if you want to talk. All right, thanks a lot.